Well, welcome and thanks to everyone for coming to this magical evening with Alice Hoffman, who is here in Salem with us. It's so exciting. This event is presented by the Salem Lit Fest. We just had our 2022 Lit Fest. It was a great success in September. You're all invited to join us next year, September 7th through 10th. Sort that out. The Salem Athenaeum, of course, is also a presenter, and Cinema Salem, who has this great space for us and great concessions, which you can go and have after our presentation. Fans will know this, but if you're new to the wonders of Alice's writing, she is the best-selling author of more than 30 works of fiction. Unbelievable. Some adapted for TV and film. And here's a partial list. Magic Lessons, the prequel to Practical Magic. The Red Garden, the Oprah's Book Club selection here on Earth, the Museum of Extraordinary Things, and the Dove Keepers. And then there are her 8 young adult novels. Prolific, I think is the word. Alice is with us tonight, as you know, to launch the paperback edition of the Book of Magic, which is the final installment of her 4-book Practical Magic series. And we're thrilled that she reached out to the Salem Athenaeum to celebrate the launch the very day that it's out, October 18th. So thank you for that. Before Alice begins, a reminder that Practical Magic with Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock will be shown tonight after the presentation. And as a courtesy, if you could keep your masks on. We're not masked, but we were before we came up on the stage. So if you could do that, that would be great. It's a full house. This is a sellout, which we're so excited about. Without further ado, Alice Hoffman, welcome back to Salem. Thank you.
We've been friends for a long time. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm excited because this is the day of my publication, so it's great to be here. Thank you for wearing masks. I know it's kind of a drag, but I really appreciate it. Personally, I really appreciate it. Thank you. So I thought I would read something to you, just a little something, and then Diana and I will talk, and then we want you to ask whatever questions you might have. I wanted to read to you from the introduction of a newer edition of Practical Magic, which I wrote, I guess, 26 years or 27 years after I wrote the original book. And I think it explains some things about what I was trying to do. And explains it to myself too. In the world of practical magic, lilacs bloom overnight and the real and the magical overlap. And the Owens women have been witches for generations. This novel is an attempt to unlock the secrets of the human heart. What price are we willing to pay for love? And how do we recognize and understand our truest selves? How does our past affect our present? Many of us know what it's like to try to escape a family legacy of one sort or another, only to discover that in the long run, we carry our heritage with us no matter how far we might run. The Owens family is one in which the women will do anything for each other. They may argue, they may disagree, but they are fiercely devoted to one another. Witches are outsiders, and who among us who have not been bullied and ostracized, we can all relate to their plight. Part of our fascination with witches is that they are the only female mythic figures with power. Am I too loud? Okay, just checking. I don't want too much power. These are women who don't need to be rescued by a prince or a king, but instead they can save themselves, sometimes with the help of a sister. They're wise and fearless women of courage. In short, they are everything that little girls wish to grow up to be. In Practical Magic and in the Rules of Magic and in Magic Lessons, girls are always encouraged to choose courage, and courage tea is the aunt's most treasured remedies. Practical Magic is the mythic reconfiguration of the journey that most women must make, whether they are sisters or mothers or daughters or aunts. And the Owens women practice magic in the modern world. Sally's the steady older sister who yearns for a normal life. Jillian is the wild, unpredictable younger sister who searches out danger. Although they are opposites, each is wary of love, for they have seen love-struck women come to their aunts for potions and remedies. The original Aunt Owens ancestor, Maria Owens, after being abandoned by one of the magistrates at the Salem witch trials, whose name happened to be Hawthorne, called down a curse upon her family to protect them from the troubles of love. And they know they carry Maria's curse. Both must fight for love in a world that is more dangerous when you open your heart, but also more meaningful and joyful once you do. 27 years after its publication, I'm delighted to say that Practical Magic lives on. Just as there are 3 generations of women in the novel, the book has been embraced by generations of readers. I have met daughters and mothers and grandmothers who've shared the novel, and nothing brings me more joy than to know that Practical Magic is a family affair. It's a book about magic, but more importantly, it's an ode to sisterhood and family and to the power of love. Readers have said that when they return to Practical Magic for a second or third reading, they experience the novel in a different way. The meaning of the book changes for them depending on their stage of life. Family dynamics are complex, and as often happens in our own lives, how we view the people close to us, even when they're fictional characters, depends on where we stand in the world at that time. Over the years, readers asked for another novel about the Owens women. My interest in personal history led me to go back in time and write first a prequel rather than a sequel. And the Rules of Magic told the story of the aunts from Practical Magic, Franny and Jet, when they're young and first experience their own magical awakenings. And it was a pleasure for me to return to Greenwich Village as a researcher and revisit the landscape of my own youth. The novelist can be the last to know what a novel is about, and I'm often surprised by the turns in my own stories and by the choices my characters make. Franny and Jet's brother Vincent, has a story that neither he nor I would have predicted, one that is at the heart of the Rules of Magic. I started writing a novel with a question that I needed answered. Practical Magic addresses serious more so now than they were 27 years ago, because unfortunately, over the past quarter century, the place of women in society has not moved forward as we'd wished then and now. There are still many of the same issues left to address: equal pay, childcare, healthcare, sexual assault. Magic may not be able to right these wrongs, but sisterhood just might. And the years have only intensified the importance of telling women's stories and doing our best to ensure that women who have been forced to be silent can speak and tell their own truths. Fortunately, the Owens women spoke to me. I loved magic from the start, beginning with the stories that my Russian grandmother told me. And if magic was in the title of a book, I was bound to find it. It was a world of fairy tales and folk tales, a world where one day there is a knock at the door, or a rose that blooms through the winter, or a spindle that must be avoided at all costs. It was melding the magical and the everyday that was most affecting to me as a reader. For the world I lived in seemed much the same. People you loved could disappear through death or divorce. They could turn into heroes or beasts. My personal experience and my childhood reading left me longing for a world in which anything could happen, magic or not, on an ordinary day. More and more readers have come to feel that magical literature is the original form of storytelling, including fairy tales and folk tales and myths. And if I were to write Practical Magic today, I would begin in exactly the same way as I did those years ago. For more than 200 years, the Owens women have been blamed for everything that has gone wrong in town. There are those that have come to the book after watching the film version of Practical Magic, a movie that boasts one of the most exceptional casts of women ever gathered. It's a rare film that is so chock full of interesting female characters, and they argue and form friendships, they hurt one another, and they support one another. The film is great fun, but it doesn't avoid the darkness in the story. Jillian's history of abuse resonates, as does Sally's emotional journey of love and loss. I can't wait for readers to discover the origins of the family and to find out with the Book of Magic how the story ends. The story always surprises me, and I expect it always takes a life of its own. And it's always about once upon a time, there was a woman or a girl who was different, who was an outcast, who looked for beauty in the world, who was wounded, who fell in love despite all the warnings and would do anything for her sister or her niece or her daughter or her mother, who knew that despite the dangers, we must fall in love whenever we can.
Oh. So you wrote this how many years after?
I think it was 25 or 26, but it's now 27 years.
Wow.
And I think the film just celebrated, I think it was 24 years that it came out.
Wow. And did you know when you wrote this, that, or did you have an inkling that you would be writing about the Owens family for so many more years?
I had no idea. And because of that, I've made mistakes. You know, if I had known, I would have done a large outline and I would have blocked it out and I would have known what would happen. But it wasn't like that for me because I never thought I would write another book about the Owens family. And the only reason I did is I kept getting notes and messages from readers saying, I don't think the story is over. I think you should write more. And otherwise I would have, that's why I think it was something like 20 years between the books. And because I just never even thought of it until people started to write to me.
Because of course, some of your books really don't have the magical element in them or are not as prominent.
Yeah, but I've made one terrible mistake that like once a month someone will say, did you ever notice that every month that Michael dies in two different ways? Oh, at least dead twice. But I think, I made mistakes because I really, I didn't chart it out originally the way some people do when they know they're going to write 4 books about the same characters.
And it wasn't in chronological order. I mean, you're just jumping from, centuries to centuries. It's like,
what a mess.
Why wouldn't you have this? That's great. So what is your favorite character in the Owens family?
Well, I was just writing about this. I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but I think my favorite character is Vincent. He came as a surprise. I didn't know there was a brother. He just sometimes writing is such hard work and it's such hard work for me that sometimes someone will just walk in the door. And that's what happened with him. That happened initially with Practical Magic with Sally and Jillian. And he just walked through the door and he was just so himself. And he was on this journey that he didn't really understand and I really didn't understand. And so yeah, I very much miss him. And there was times when I wish that I had written a book just about him and his life.
Yeah, and as you said in your foreword, so much of your writing has to do about relationships and family and love. And the sibling relationships, I think, are what really get me in your books.
Yeah,
the sisters.
And then I think, for me, I write about, I'm not really an autobiographical writer. I'm more of a wish fulfillment writer. And so I don't have a sister and I don't have a daughter. And that's a huge lack for me. So when I write, I get to have those things or experience that.
What I appreciated too, and this is another reason to buy the book, throughout the Book of Magic, you list many novels and also the poems of Emily Dickinson. From Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 to Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, you've got 3 Jane Austen novels that are mentioned. How are they connected to the Owens family? How did you sneak those in?
Well, I think this book, The Book of Magic, is all about books and the meaning of books in our lives. I mean, I think it starts out, I'm not exactly sure how it starts out, but I think it starts out like all the best stories begin in a library.
Right.
And I always feel that's true. And, libraries are very important to me. They completely changed my life. I don't know what my life would be like if I hadn't wandered into a library. And they just, and my school library also, and the Scholastic Book Fair, which was always right. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what the world was like. I lived in a very small world, and I had no idea. And I almost feel like the books were like stones that I could like step on and see to the other side, that there was something else out there. So there is, littered through the Book of Magic are some of my favorite books. And at the end, there's a list of books that just made a difference in my life.
Yeah, just a great reading list. And as you say, it's right at the back of the book. So you can just, for the next year or two, just go through all the books. It's just great. Yeah, so speaking about librarians, there's a line in the Book of Magic where one of the characters, I guess it was Vincent. No, I guess it was Ian, who said, librarians are sexy.
Does he say that? Well, he is. Yeah, he's a librarian.
And we have librarians in the audience today. So.
Yeah, sure they are, because their minds are open.
Yes.
And they can imagine things. I always thought I would, grow up to be a librarian. And but I'm not organized enough. You know what I'm saying? So I just think, it just opens the door for so many people. And it's one of those things, there are certain careers where I think you never really know the effect that you've had on people. I always think that my school librarian, whose name was Mrs. Incan, which was like the perfect name for a librarian, she will never know, she never knew what she did for me. There's just certain jobs where you just don't know the effects that you have on people.
Well, here's where I will interject. We had several people come up here before we started the program, and they said, Alice, you have changed my life with your writing. So talk about having impact on people.
Well, I certainly feel that way about certain books in my life, that there's like a before and the after that you read the book. And the way I always feel that the books that I love is that it doesn't just feel that as if I know them. It's as if somehow they know me. Do you know what I'm saying? They know how I feel somehow. And it's just a connection. I mean, there is no book without a reader. It's just a shared experience. And you as a reader imagine it the way you imagine it, and every reader imagines it differently. So it's a very personal, intimate encounter. And actually my next book, which I shouldn't talk about, is about someone who falls in love with a book, and also the complete changes her life, and also with the writer of the book.
Okay, so this isn't really giving anything away, but the last time I saw Alice was at the House of the Seven Gables, and she was doing her research for the novel that's coming.
True.
Yeah, and we get a private tour and the whole bit.
Yeah, it was great.
It was great. It was wonderful. So let me look at our list of questions here. There are both endings and beginnings throughout the novel. And what do you see as the continuation of the Owens family?
Well, I was absolutely sure that this was the end. Just the way I was absolutely sure I was only going to write one book. When I finished it, I felt very depressed that I was no longer going to be involved with this family. And I've had a lot of people write to me about kind of ideas for, what the next book could be. And I thought a lot about it. And, I just don't exactly know where it's going to go, but I'm kind of leaving the door open.
Okay. So you're not going to tell us really anything more about this upcoming book?
I can't yet. I can't yet.
Is there something we can do?
No, but it does have something to do with time travel. I'll just say that.
Oh my God.
And I am a huge time travel fan. So I love time travel. And I love time travel that also kind of teaches you about what your present day life is like. I love The Midnight Library. Did you?
Oh, yes.
That was such a great book. And such a great book for the time of COVID, when so many people were so depressed and feeling like they had made mistakes. And, so that's my current favorite time travel book.
Okay. So I guess that's all we're going to get about the next one. But we'll find out about it certainly.
Yeah.
And not just you, Alice, but I've noticed that other authors, it's like the book takes over and the authors have to go in that direction.
Yeah.
So how much control do you have over a book when you're writing? I mean, to me, it sounds, well, how is that so?
Well, I think it's both. I think for me, I make outlines. I usually do these poster boards with these post-it notes, and I
Like a
kind of
storyboard. with
storyboard,
movies.
exactly. Like, because I worked in Hollywood, and I kind of learned how to do that there. Not that it was such a great success there, but there's a time in writing where it just takes over, and it's almost like a dream state or a drug state or something. And that's kind of why I'm a writer, that state of being. But then you have to rewrite and rewrite. I mean, there's a lot of work involved, but that other part where you're imagining it is kind of makes it worth it usually.
Right, but the characters themselves are driving the book. It's almost like, I mean, you're writing it, but to me, it's interesting that there doesn't seem to be that much control over it. Is that how you feel? I mean, it goes the direction it goes.
You can always kill them. You can. But somebody asked me, when you're writing a book, are you thinking of actors that might play those parts or something? Not at all, because I don't see them. I'm inside of them. So I'm not looking at them. I'm looking out through their eyes.
Okay.
I don't even know what they look like because they're me.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
So you mentioned Hollywood. You had a foray out there. I mean, it just.
Yes, for 25 years. I was
Wow.
there for a long time.
You were screenwriting?
I was a screenwriter.
Okay.
Because I became a screenwriter because a lot of my friends who were writers were also professors or teachers to support themselves. And I saw with them that especially the ones who were good at their jobs, they didn't get to write very much. So I didn't want to do that. And I felt like I could make more money and do less work if I worked for Tom Cruise. And that was actually true.
Really?
Yeah.
So what's he like?
He was very young at the time, so he was different.
Have you seen the new Top Gun?
No.
It's actually good. So then you, so it's full-time writing.
Yeah.
I mean, writing books.
Yeah.
And you have said to me before that you have to write. You're compelled to write. I mean, that's.
Yeah. I feel like if I don't write, I'm more depressed. I feel like writing is it's an escape for me. Like it's the same thing that reading is for so many people. It's a way to be in the world, but leave the world also, to have like a whole different experience and to escape the things you want to escape. I mean, that's what it is for me to write. Only I think, 3 times the escapism. So that's what I'm going for usually when I'm working.
Is it cathartic at all?
Cathartic, in other words, do I fix things in my life?
Yeah.
Or do I know? I think I know things. I always think the writer's the last to know like the truth about a book.
That's so amazing.
And, I'm writing from kind of a subconscious place, so I'm not really sure of what things mean. I mean, eventually I sort of figure it out, but it takes a long time. And often other people figure it out first.
We're going to be opening this up to questions pretty soon, but if there is a message from the Book of Magic that you would like your readers to take away, what might that be?
I always feel like I'm writing the message for myself. I feel like I'm much more positive as a writer than I am as a person. So I feel like those messages I'm writing for myself. And I think in a way, the Book of Magic, even though there are 2 deaths of 2 very important characters, is a very kind of joyous book because it's all about kind of remaining true to yourself. And I think it ends in kind of a joyful way.
Okay. This is not a spoiler really, because I think it says inside the book jacket, but the curse is broken.
The curse is broken.
The curse is broken. So what happens to love once the curse is broken?
Yeah, it's complicated.
So it might become a spoiler if you started to talk about that, or?
I think it might. I think it might. I'm afraid to say too much.
Okay. All right. Well, Alice, I've known you for what, 16 years? Because this is interesting. We first met at a book signing at Salem State University.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you signed my book and we
That's
started
right.
to
I
chat.
remember that. I just had a flashback to that moment.
Right, and we've kept in touch through the years, and absolutely, so it's just
Yeah,
been
and I
great.
really appreciate you being here because you are a great interviewer, and thank you so much for.
Oh,
being
well, it's
here.
just so. We've had lunch together.
Yeah,
It's just like
that. Right, and I always talk about myself.
I love it because then the focus is on me. Well, let's see what time it is. All right. So it's past 7:30. So we wanted to give a lot of time to our audience, and I'm sure you have questions or comments. And so if you could stand up and project, and Alice will listen to your questions and hopefully be able to answer them. Would like to start? Oh, way in the back. Oh, yes, in
Yeah,
fact,
that's
in
good.
fact, if you'd like to come down, that makes more sense.
That's smart.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank
First
you.
of all. When you write, what inspires you first? Is it the character, the plot, the premise? Like what really gets you excited to come to the page?
Did everybody hear her? Yeah, okay. It's varied, you know, sometimes it's the character, sometimes it's a place. You know, for instance, I was at a museum out in Western Massachusetts and they had a Pizarro exhibit and I was like wandering around. I wasn't particularly interested in him or his art. And then it said, oh, he had grown up in St. Thomas, which I thought was surprising. And then it said he was Jewish, which I thought that's surprising. And then it said his mother was the most hated woman on St. Thomas. I'm like, whoa, I'm interested now. So it could be, you know, it can be from, very often it's from traveling or from stories that I hear. When I wrote The World That We Knew, there was, which was about hidden children in France. That kind of happened because a woman was waiting for me in a parking lot after I gave a talk. And she said to me, I want you to write my life. And I said, I don't do that. She's like, well, listen to my life. And then I thought about it for about 15 years and then I wrote it. So it's all different, comes in all different ways.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Incidentally, The World That We Knew is my husband's, like, and it's top 10, wouldn't you say? Yeah, just
Thank
loved it.
you.
And so I'm going to read it next. So we had another question back there too.
Yeah, I just want to say my mom is the one she's the one who first heard me on your book. And we have just loved your books for decades. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. As I said, I love that it's a generational thing. And my mother and I used to share books all the time, even when we weren't speaking to each other. So,
I also was introduced to your books from my mother, being obsessed with practical magic, and the book and the movie when I was younger. You guys introduced to it like as soon as it came out. It's like Halloween every year.
thank you.
So I'm kind of curious, when the movie was being made, what was maybe your favorite thing that they did with the adaptation and your least favorite, and also time travel book recommendation?
Time travel book.
Recommendation. If you have
Okay.
not read Una Out of Order, that is.
Out of order. I haven't read that.
Una Out of
Out of order. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so the movie, you know, the movie really got made because of Sandra Bullock. She wanted to make it, she made it happen. I'm really grateful to her. And the most amazing thing was I went out there and I went, half of the set was like on a set, and the other half they built kind of the outside of the house on an island off of Seattle. But I went to LA and walked inside the house and walked into that kitchen, and I just thought, I couldn't believe the kitchen. I was just really like bowled over by the kitchen. I think it's the best kitchen ever. And I felt like I was walking into my book. And then I went into the office of the set designer. And she had this huge wall that was like a mood board, which is something that I do also, where there were all these different images that were kind of inspiring her. And I felt like I am like the set designer because she creates the world for people to then walk into. And that's what I'm doing as a novelist. I'm creating the world that the characters can can walk into. I mean, I think the movie and the book are very different. I think they are both, I like the movie. It's not that I think, you know, I don't mind that it's different. I think that actors are amazing, and I don't know if there's ever been that many great women actresses all together. And I think it's interesting because for me, I felt like it was this sense of, I had sat in this like little shed, you know, all by myself with these characters. And then all of a sudden there were hundreds of people involved and working to create this movie. It's such a different process. That was a great feeling. You know, it was really nice to see that happen.
Oh, well, yeah. Golly. Next question.
Hi. I was just curious about the rules of magic series that was kind of talked about. Yeah. Is this the-
Oh, the Rules of Magic series?
Yeah.
Oh, do you want to know what happened?
Yes.
Well, don't tell anyone, and it's very sad. So we got the green light, which means it's like the go ahead. You know, it was Warner's owns the rights to it, and it was sold to HBO Max. They got the go ahead. They were going to film in September, but September's passed. They're in New York City. And 2 weeks after we got the green light, the Discovery Channel, which I will never watch again, bought HBO Max and canceled a huge amount of dramas, including The Rules of Magic. It doesn't mean it's over, but it's not looking very good. So I don't know what's going to happen. It had a great script, and I don't know. Well, that's it. That's it. No Discovery Channel. Right.
So Alice, I hope that HBO paid you up front. No?
No. Nobody gets paid up front in Hollywood.
Okay. Any more questions?
Right over there.
Yes.
Yeah. What job were you working when you wrote your first book?
What job was I working?
When you wrote your first book,
I-
Property of, correct?
Property of. I was in graduate school, and actually what happened to me, it was a big lesson for me. I had written a story, and my professor knew somebody at the small magazine called Fiction, which is still a great magazine, and you know, no money, nothing like that. It was involved, but they published it. I was so ecstatic. And I got a letter from a famous editor who had seen my story, and he said, "Do you have a novel?" And I wrote back and said, "Yes, I do." And I started writing it really fast. And even though I was in graduate school, and I was also the secretary of the Stanford Sex Clinic, which is someday, I don't even know if I could write this book. So, and I was also working in a department store, but I finished the novel in 6 months because I thought, what if this guy quits or dies or something? You know? And it really needed a lot of work. So he worked on it with me. And in the end, he didn't take it. He took a book by Tom Robbins instead. But he sent me to my agent, and she sold it to Farrah Straus. And, you know, it was just, I learned the lesson that, you know, just walk through the door. And then if you don't finish it, you don't finish it. But I felt like saying yes at that moment is the reason that I became a writer, because I don't think that chance would have ever happened again.
Yes. By the way, that's one of my favorite books of yours, Property
Thank
of.
you.
Yeah, I mean, even when you were, you know, much younger and didn't know the ropes as much, I mean, it's really good. I don't know if anyone here has read that, Property of.
Yeah. No.
That'll change. Anyone? Oh, yes, please.
So you write very knowledgeably about magic and potions and things like that. Do you have personal experience with that, or where do you research?
I'm a big researcher. I have a magic library. I do a ton of research. What I usually do is I do research before I start a book, then I write the book, and then I go back and do more research. And I often ask experts to read it, or people more knowledgeable than I am about a certain thing to read it. And I try to be careful when I'm doing potions and things like that, because when the movie came out, I mean, I don't want like a 10-year-old girl to poison her cat accidentally. When the movie came out, two things happened. I hope I can remember them. Two crimes were committed. One was, I can't remember what they were, but they had to do about, it was poisoning. It had to do with poisoning. And I just thought, you know, I'm never going to put in anything that could really work in a negative way. I'm trying to remember what the crimes were.
Ooh.
But I can't remember.
So if we went to your house en masse and walked through to your kitchen, and would we on the shelves and hanging from the beams and stuff, would we see sprigs of lavender and sage and special oils and things like that? I mean, do you incorporate that in your life?
You would see dog biscuits. That's my life.
Speaking of dogs, I don't know if any, but probably at least half of you are on social media and you follow Alice. She has the most wonderful dog, Shelby. Tell us a little bit about Shelby.
She has her own Instagram page. And I'm very involved with her. What can I say? You know, a writer, you spend so much time alone that, you know, your dog becomes kind of your coworker. And that's it. Does she read your books? Not to my knowledge.
Anything else? Oh, Carolyn.
Yeah, I have a question from Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, from Heather in the audience.
Ah.
So she wants to know, is it easy to let go of your work to another artist to interpret? Some authors are very against their work being adapted to another medium. Her example is Alan Moore. But how do you feel about it?
Well, I think I feel differently because I was a screenwriter for 25 years and I did do things to other people's books, you know, and
Yeah.
it's a different medium. And you know, I think if you feel that way, then you should not let anyone do anything with your work. But it's also kind of interesting to see what comes out and what other people make of the same themes and the same characters. And sometimes it works great and sometimes it doesn't. I've had things that I've liked more than others. You know, for me, when they did the Dove Keepers, it was a very mixed bag of the way I felt about it. But it was what it was, you know, I mean, the book's the book, the film's the film, you know, I think they can both exist.
So for the Dove Keepers, you went to Masada in Israel, correct?
Oh, for the book, yeah.
Yeah. So your writing is taking you really all over the place.
Yeah,
You're just back from Amsterdam.
yeah. Yeah,
That must be so cool.
it is cool, but sometimes, you know, sometimes you don't want to see the place. Sometimes you want to be able to imagine it. I felt that with St. Thomas. I didn't go there until after the book was written. After the book was written, the synagogue that the family had gone to invited me to come and speak. But before that, I didn't want to go because St. Thomas now is nothing like St. Thomas then. So, you know, it's different. Amsterdam is still Amsterdam, but St. Thomas has changed so radically as a tourist destination that I didn't want to see it beforehand.
Anybody else? Right there.
Hi, thank you for being here today. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your writing practice. If you write every day, or how long do you write on any given session, and if there are any other burgeoning writers in this room
Sure.
that you could provide some do's and don'ts for, that would be really
Okay.
helpful.
Okay, because I need them myself because I'm in a crisis right now. I really believe in getting up every day and working. I mean, depending on what time of day works for you. For me, it was always the morning. But, you know, things change. It changes, you know, your life changes and things change. So for me, I always got up early, tried to work for 2 hours at least before the world woke up. I feel like for me, you know, I don't know how it is for other people. If I stop, it's hard to get going again. So I feel like the more I write, the more I write. And sometimes when I have a problem and I'm trying to think about it, I know that the best way to really figure things out is to write your way into it. I also used to do something which I think is smart and I should start doing it again, is not read what I write. Just like, decide I'm going to write 50 pages. I'm not going to read it because everything I read, I'm going to just throw out. So, but if I get into a groove and I start going, maybe by the end of that 50 pages, I'll have something. I also, really believe in workshops. I think it's great to get together with other writers. It can be difficult because people have their own agendas, but if there are people that you trust their opinion. And then also you have to write, it's your Tuesday or whatever, and you have to have something. I think it's really helpful.
Anybody?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being such an incredible writer. I just wanted to ask if you have a favorite bookstore or library in Boston that you're really partial to.
I'm really partial to the Harvard bookstore. It's kind of my neighborhood bookstore. I've been going there for years and years. So that's kind of my local bookstore. But, there's so many bookstores all across the country that I've been to, visiting and speaking, that I have favorites all over. I love a bookstore called Warwick's, which is in the San Diego area. I like Porter Square Books also in Cambridge. And there's just so many great bookstores. And whenever I travel, that's one of the things I want to do is visit the bookstore. And, whatever country I'm in, wherever I am, because I just feel like you just get a sense of what the world is like from being in a bookstore. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here. You had mentioned earlier about being introduced to your agent. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between the author and the agent, and have you stayed with the same person?
Yeah, my agent was Elaine Markson, so I was with her from the time I was 23 until the time that she died, which was about 10 years ago. She was an incredible person. She was had her own agency in Greenwich Village. She was the agent. Let me just explain that I used to get these bills for A. Hoffman because she was apparently lending A. Hoffman a lot of money, and it was Abby Hoffman. And somehow I got charged. She had a lot of very left-wing and feminist writers. Andrea Dworkin, Salman Rushdie was her writer at the beginning before he moved on. Just a lot of really interesting writers. She was an agent who had zero interest in money. That was not her thing. And her husband had been a cult writer. So she had lived in Mexico with who's that guy that wrote the book really fast in 30 days? Oh, On the Road. Jack Kerouac, was living on her couch. I mean, she was that kind of person. So, she came from such a different era. And I spoke to her every day. And she was extremely supportive and great. I was really so lucky to be with her. I think now writing has become more corporate in a lot of ways. I feel like I was lucky to be starting out when I started. There's still, lots of independent presses, and there's great magazines. I'm actually editing an issue of Plowshares magazine from Emerson College right now. But I don't know. I think it's harder right now. I think you have to kind of find your way, sometimes in a different way, in the not traditional way of publishing.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, Alex. You talked earlier.
Hi.
So I have a 13-year-old niece. She's 13 in today's world of social media, worrying about, other girls and, how she looks, how she feels. What advice would you give someone of her age dealing with today's world of books? You talk about being yourself and everything. What advice would you give someone?
That's a great question. It's a really hard question. I don't know if I have the answer for it because when I was growing up, that was a non-issue. I mean, that didn't exist. So I don't really know what it's like for young people to have to deal with all of the stuff that they deal with on social media, the bullying and the ostracizing people. And I think it must be very difficult. We're all so attached to social media. I think I look at my phone every 5 minutes. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen that series Black Mirror. Did you watch that? It's great. And it's all about kind of the horrible things that can happen with technology and with just what you're talking about. I'd say spend more time reading. than being online and reading books that will let you know that even if you're an outsider, everybody kind of feels like they're an outsider is the truth of it all. But I wish I had more and better advice. But thank you.
No, that's great advice. Just, read. Anyone else? Yes.
I actually had something for that, if you don't mind.
Oh,
Without fail, my entire life, every single person that I've ever met has treated me better, especially when they were starting to judge me a little bit. The second I showed them, I just didn't care. They dropped everything. They smiled a little bit. They started to treat me better. They treated me with more respect in the future. And everyone grows up beautiful.
and you have a question? Yes.
I was 15 years old when my aunt gave me The River King.
Oh,
I've read it 5 times.
oh my gosh.
I just love it so much. And beside that, that was just a comment. I don't have a sister. I always wanted a sister. My mother has a sister, and I now have 2 daughters, and I'm just so thrilled with the sister relationships in the Practical Magic series. It just gives me so much hope for them for the future. My question though is there a recipe for the chocolate tipsy cake?
Yes, there.
Yes. My assistant Madeline knows it. She's sitting next to you. Yeah, there are several, there's several recipes that have come up. One was in
Flourless chocolate cake?
yeah, that was one of them, and it was in they now call it Enchanting Living, but it was called Fairy Magazine, and that was a really great one. So there's various ones. I have a little cookbook that we kind of put together, but nothing's really happening with it. I just want to say you're so lucky to have 2 daughters, and I actually just had something come out only on Amazon, excuse me, but it's about sisters. It's called The Bookstore Sisters. And it's very much about, sisters' relationships and how important they are. So you might,
I'll have to read it.
you might like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Neil, my husband.
Oh, really?
Finally, you called on me. Alice, I wanted to ask you about the world that we do. You said that you met the woman 15 years before you started writing the book.
Yeah.
What brought you at that point to write the book?
Well, when she told me her story, first of all, I said to her, look, I don't use real life stories, but also I have to say, I admit to you, but this is our secret again. I had been asked to write Schindler's List before Spielberg was involved. And I thought, who am I to write that story? I don't feel comfortable with that. And I'm not even sure anybody wants to see that story. So it took me a long time. And I met a lot of Holocaust survivors in the intervening time. And when I met them, I started to feel like they're my grandparents. And I do have a right to tell this story, even if it's not my story. And just as the years passed and I met more and more survivors, I felt, able to write the story and to write it in kind of a magical, kind of folkloric way. And so it just took me a long time to be able to write it. I did a huge amount of research and went to France and visited all of these homes. The world that we knew is about many people in Berlin, when they knew their world was ending, they sent their children away, often to France, and there were these chateaus where these children went. And most of them, I would say all of them, never saw their parents again because their parents in Germany were murdered. So it's very moving, and and to go there is very moving. And I went back. There was a village called Chaban. I can't say the whole. My French is terrible. Chaban-sur-Lignon, which was a village that decided they were going to take in Jews. And I went back to that village with this man who had lived there as a child. He hadn't been back since he was a child. It was just an overwhelming experience because it was a place where there was also goodness, in a time that there was so much evil. And I'm beginning to write about World War II again. I feel like I kind of have the right to tell the story. And when I thought about that woman waiting for me in the parking lot, she wanted me to tell her story. So, it's a difficult thing to do, but thank you. I'm really glad you like it.
Right in there.
Hi, Alice.
Hi.
I just want to say for sponsor.
Oh, hi.
And my question is, what advice would you give young professionals?
Can you say that? What advice?
Yes, what advice would you give to women in high school and college as they go out into the world?
Oh, man. Well, first I would say to them, vote.
Definitely vote.
You know, for those of us who were feminists at an earlier time, we're kind of in shock about the state of what's happening to the rights of women. And it just feels like it hasn't changed, you know, enough or that much. You know, I think it's really important to find something that you really love and that gives back to the world and gives to you. And I feel like that's happening more right now, that people don't feel like they just have to take any old job, that they want to try to figure out what is good for them to do. So, I mean, I think work is really important, but I don't think it's the most important thing in the world. And, you know, I always feel like, you know, relationships are the most important thing in the world. But if there is something that you feel like you have to do, I think it's worth trying that. I have a lot of friends who are very artistic and who are writers and who just felt like they just had to take the first job. They just couldn't go for it, which I understand. But if you don't go for it, that it will never happen. So, so I don't know, that's the only advice I have.
And this will be the last question.
What first turned you on to magic?
You know, I think the thing that first turned me on to magic, there were two things really. My Russian grandmother used to tell me stories about magic and stories about her life in Russia. And it was also, you know, the books that I found in the library. I was a huge fan of magic books. And when I read them, I just felt like I saw the world in a completely different way. I think magic is power. I think magic is is in the telling of the original stories, whether they're fairy tales or folk tales. And one of the writers that I really loved was Edward Eger. I don't know if you've ever read him, but one of the things I loved about him, he had like 7 children's books, was that magic happened in like the most ordinary places. You know, you could just be walking down your ordinary street in your neighborhood and all of a sudden it would happen. And I always wished for that where I lived, a place I hated and wanted to escape from. You know, I just wanted there to be another reality that if I just looked hard enough, I would see it. Thank you.
Alice, thank you for being here.
So you see the movie.
Yes, now you can see the movie. Just a formal thank you to everyone who has come in, and hopefully you can stay for the movie if you can. And that will be shown at 8:15. So you have time to use the loo, to get something to eat. The books are still for sale also, and a lot of them are signed. So anyway, thank you very much to Salem Lit Fest and the Salem Athenaeum, which is right down the street on Essex Street. And it still has a card catalog. I'm going to give you a tour sometime. Yes, absolutely. And to Cinema Salem. And so we'll let Alice go ahead and thank you.